Inevitably, the words Wild West evoke an image of cowboys and cattle running across vast open plains. We owe this widespread idea to the cattle kingdom and the long drive. Starting after the Civil War, cowboys would move cattle from Texas to the nearest railroad, where the cattle were shipped to markets and sold.
Leave old Texas now. They've got no use.
Here was all these cheap longhorn steers overrunning Texas. Here was the rest of the country crying out for beef, and no railroads in Texas to get them out. So they trailed them out across hundreds of miles of wild country.
Longhorn cattle is a breed of cattle that was brought to California and Texas by Spanish settlers in the 1700s. This specific type of cattle was used because they could withstand the long drives that led them to railroads. Once there, they were sent in freight cars to the east where they used every part of the cattle for profit. Their meat was used for food, their skin for clothes and leather, and their fat for candles. As time went on, many people began to raise longhorn cattle because it was a growing industry. 44% of the entire nation was dedicated to the cattle industry. Cowboys purchased the cattle for less than $10, and in return they were sold to merchants in the East for 3 times their original price. Cowboys drove the longhorn cattle from Texas through barren plains to the cow towns. These journeys are known as the long drive. During these drives, the cattle moved slowly, covering only 10 to 15 miles a day, and the journey lasted about 6 weeks to 2 months. The cowboys moved anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 cattle a drive. En route, the cattle were watered in the morning and ate their way northward. The cowboys kept them from stopping, turning back, or leaving the herd. At night, the herds would stop at a watering hole and bed down. The 4 main trails used during the long drives were the Chisholm Trail, the Goodnight Loving Trail, the Shawnee Trail, and the Western Trail. These trails ended in places called cow towns, like Dodge City in Abilene, Kansas, Ogallala, Nebraska, and Cheyenne, Wyoming.
The Chisholm Trail was 800 to 1,000 miles long and ended in Abilene and Ellsworth, Kansas. The trail acquired its name from trader Jesse Chisholm, a part Cherokee who, just before the Civil War, built a trading post in what is now western Oklahoma City.
The life of a cowboy was very difficult and dangerous work. The average cowboy was 24 years old and was of any race. These men spent months in their saddles and often wearing the same clothes. They worked so hard and were paid so poorly that a majority of them only drove cattle once.
Morally, as a class, cowboys were foul-mouthed, blasphemous, drunken, lecherous, and utterly corrupt. Usually harmless on the plains when sober, they are dreaded in towns. For them, liquor has an ascendancy over them. If a storm come and the cattle started running, you'd hear that low rumbling noise along the ground. Then you jump for your horse and get out there in the lead, trying to head them and get them into the mill before they scattered to hell and gone. It was riding at a dead run in the dark, with cut banks and prairie dog holes all around you, not knowing if the next jump would land you in a shallow grave.
The era of the cattle drives did not last long for a few reasons. The trails were very dangerous and labor-intensive. More people moved to the west, barbed wire fences were created, which people used to fence in their lands on the open plains, and the railroads were extended into Texas, so the need to move the cattle long distances no longer existed. The last cattle drive took place in the late summer of 1881. The cattle industry did not end, it has just transformed.
The broad and boundless prairies have already been bounded, and the tide of white settlement during the last few years has risen over the west like a flood, and the cattlemen are soon to be overtaken.